1769, the expedition to Upper California. Father Serra worked in the missions of Baja California for about a year. While he was there, he heard tales of a mysterious wilderness north of Baja California called Alta California or Upper California. 2 centuries earlier, the Spanish explorer Juan Cabrillo had discovered the San Diego Bay in Alta California. Another Spanish explorer, Sebastian Vizcaino, discovered Monterey Bay about 60 years later. Of course, the Indians of Alta California had found these bays many years earlier. The Indians had flourished for thousands of years before the Spaniards arrived. They lived in small groups of hunter-gatherers and hunted for elk, rabbits, and other animals. They fished for salmon, turtles, and shellfish. They gathered wild fruits, roots, and nuts. They did not farm since the land already provided an abundance of food. Most Indians had never seen a European, but that was about to change. Over 150 years had passed since Spanish explorers had mapped the bays of San Diego and Monterey. By the mid-1700s, most people had forgotten where the bays were. Now ships from other countries were sailing along the California coast. Russians sailed down from Alaska and built a fort in Alta California where they hunted for seals and sea otters. Sir Francis Drake, an English explorer, sailed past the location of modern-day San Francisco. He even stepped ashore and claimed the land for England. King Carlos III of Spain acted quickly. He did not want to lose Alta California to Russia or England. The king checked Vizcaino's old maps. He ordered José de Galvez, a Spanish official in Mexico, to find the lost harbors of San Diego and Monterey as soon as possible. The Spanish king wanted Alta California to be settled by Spanish colonists, not by Russian or English ones. José de Galvez immediately organized an expedition to explore Alta California. Part of the group would travel by sea and the other by land. He asked Franciscan friars to join the sacred expedition by land. The friars would establish a chain of missions along the coast of Alta California, beginning in San Diego. The goal was for the missions to prosper and eventually grow into towns. Galvez chose Father Junípero Serra to be in charge of establishing the missions. Serra would convert the natives to the Christian religion and teach them Spanish ways of living. The soldiers would build forts called presidios to guard the settlements. Father Serra, now 55 years old and not in the best health, but he was excited to go. It was the job he had been waiting for all his life, to preach his Christian faith in a land where no missionary had ever been. Preparations for the sacred expedition began. José de Galvez ordered 3 ships, the San Antonio, the San Carlos, and the San Jose, to be made ready. The ships were packed with cargo for the new missions, bells and paintings of saints for the churches, farm tools, blankets, chickens, pigs, seeds, and cuttings of flowers and fruit trees. Father Serra prepared to leave Baja California. He gathered everything he owned, his Bible, his prayer book, and his crucifix, and left Laredo. After one day, he stopped at the mission of San Xavier to say goodbye to his old friend, Father Francisco Pelou. Father Pelou was shocked at how sick Father Serra was. The sore on Father Serra's leg had grown worse, and he could barely walk. 2 men had to lift him into the saddle of his old swayback mule. Besides his painful leg, Father Serra had asthma. He sometimes made wheezing sounds as he breathed. Father Pelou begged him to stay, to forget such a difficult trip north, but Father Serra had determined to go. His health was not good, but he had an amazing supply of energy. "Goodbye until we meet again in Monterey," called Father Serra. Father Pelou did not think he would ever see his friend again. "Until we meet in eternity," he answered. Father Serra traveled up the Baja Peninsula on his mule. Some nights he slept under the stars. The other nights he stayed at one of the Spanish missions that dotted the Baja California coast. At one mission, he met a 15-year-old Indian boy named José. José spoke Spanish and several Indian dialects. He joined Father Serra as his helper on the expedition. He would teach Father Serra the Indian languages so that he could better communicate with the natives. After 500 miles, they finally reached the mission of Santa Maria. There, Serra met the military commander of the expedition, Gaspar de Portola. Portola divided the expedition members who were traveling by land into 2 groups. Father Serra joined Portola's group. A second group, led by Captain Rivera, herded 200 head of cattle ahead of them, along with horses and mules. The expedition continued northward. About 300 soldiers, friars, and Christian Indians slowly made their way into the wilderness of Alta California. After a few days of travel, Father Serra's leg grew worse. It became so swollen and painful that he asked to stop and rest. He could not walk or even stand. Captain Portola wanted to send him back to Laredo, but Father Serra insisted on going on. He said, "I trust that God will give me the strength to arrive at San Diego, as he has given me to arrive this far. But even if I may die on the road, I will not turn back." He was a small man, barely 5 feet and 2 inches tall, but he was filled with determination. Father Serra noticed the muleteer putting poultices on the sore leg of a mule. He asked the man to make a poultice for his leg. The muleteer melted yellow tallow over a fire and stirred in oil and herbs. He placed the hot mixture on Father Serra's leg. It worked. By the next morning, Father Serra could ride again. Indians soon appeared along the path. Father Serra gave them colorful glass beads and ribbons. He wrote in his diary, "I gave them all that I could. I treated them as kindly as I could." Fascinated by the Spaniards' clothes, the Indians touched the leather jackets of the soldiers and tugged at the gray woolen robes of the friars. Father Serra showed his eyeglasses to a curious Indian. The Indian showed the glasses to his friend, and before long Father Serra couldn't find them. He followed the 2 men to their huts and searched all day for his glasses. He finally spotted a woman who had fastened them into her hair as a decoration. To his great relief, she gave the precious eyeglasses back. The founding of Mission San Diego. On May 14, 1769, after 2 long months, Bertola's group finally spotted the San Antonio and the San Carlos docked in a large harbor. It was San Diego Bay, discovered once again after 150 years. King Carlos III would be quite pleased when he heard the news. Now Spain could begin to colonize Alta California. But joy soon turned to sorrow. Many people on the ships had scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. The captains of San Carlos had almost the entire crew died. Half of the members of the sacred expedition had also died, and half of those still living were very sick. Father Serra nursed the sick and comforted the dying. He was helped by a doctor named Don Pedro Prat, who gathered green herbs in the woods to give the sick travelers. On July 3rd, Father Serra wrote to a friend, "Those who are to come here as ministers should not imagine that they come for any other purpose than to put up with hardships for the love of God and the salvation of the souls." They waited for the 3rd ship, the San Jose, to arrive. It never came. The San Jose and all aboard had been lost at sea. Now that they had found San Diego, Captain Bertola wanted to move on and search for Monterey. With Vizcaino's 150-year-old map and sketchy descriptions of the bay, he led a search party north along the coast. Meanwhile, the San Antonio sailed back to Mexico to get more supplies and sailors. The empty San Carlos rode the waves like a ghost ship. Father Serra and about 40 others were left behind in San Diego. It was their job to build the mission and to make friends with the Indians. A few soldiers stayed with them for protection. On July 16, 1769, Father Serra opened the mission of San Diego by hanging bells from a tree branch and ringing them. He placed a large wooden cross in the ground and conducted a religious service. It marked the beginning of European settlement of the modern-day state of California. Father Serra and some others began building a church of branches and dried clay. They built huts to live in, a supply hut, and barracks for the soldiers. They planted a garden of beans, wheat, and corn. When there was time, Father Serra tended to the men who were still sick with scurvy. The Tipai Indians came to watch. They were fascinated by the leather jackets and colorful platoons worn by the soldiers. They loved the beauty of Spanish cloth and soon brought fish to trade for it. For a large fish, the Tipais wanted lots of cloth. One night, the soldiers found the Tipais aboard and deserted San Carlos. They were cutting a large cloth square from the sail. From then on, 2 soldiers guarded the ship and warned the Tipais to stay away. It was not long before the Tipais began to notice that many Spaniards were sick. They decided they could easily fight them and win. They wanted their cloth and other items of interest. On August 15th, about 20 Tipai warriors attacked the mission with bows and arrows. The soldiers fired back with muskets. Dropping to his knees inside his hut, Father Serra prayed that no Spaniards or Tipais would be killed in the battle. Then he heard a scream as Jose, his helper, fell through the curtained doorway. The 15-year-old boy died in his arms. After several Tipais fell to the ground, the Indians ran away. They had never seen guns before and were shocked at how deadly they were. The soldiers were angry and wanted revenge, but Father Serra said no. He told the soldiers that the Tipais needed understanding, not anger. A few days later, the Tipais returned to the mission with their wounded, as if nothing had happened. Dr. Pratt and the friars treated their wounds. Autumn came, followed by the chill winds of winter. The San Diego settlers were cold and hungry. Their food supply was dwindling. Where was the supply ship for Mexico, and where were Captain Patola and his men? Were they lost? Had they ever found Monterey? About 1 month after Christmas, Captain Patola's group marched back into the San Diego mission. They had been so hungry, and they had eaten their mules. But what adventures they had experienced! They had discovered the Bay of San Francisco, where they had seen huge whales and thousands of sea lions. They had felt the rumble of earthquakes, and they had seen giant trees with red wood. However, Captain Patola was greatly disappointed. He was sure that he had not found the Bay of Monterey. All that he could think about was finding Monterey for King Carlos III. That had been his job, and he was sure he had failed. January turned to February and then to March. Where was the San Antonio? The supply ship had gone almost 8 long months. They could not go on without more food and supplies. Captain Patola decided to abandon the San Diego mission and to return to Mexico. He refused to wait any longer. He was so hungry and discouraged he was ready to give up. The mission of San Carlos. Father Serra did not want to leave the mission he had worked so hard to build. He loved the Tapais and did not want to leave them. He asked Patola to wait a little longer. Captain Patola agreed to wait a few more days. If the San Antonio did not return by March 16th, he declared, they were going back to Mexico. They would desert the mission. The soldiers packed up their supplies. Father Serra began a novena, 9 days of prayer. For 9 days he prayed for the supply ship to return by March 16th. At 3 p.m. on March 16th, he spotted the sails of the San Antonio. The supply ship was finally back. The mission of San Diego was saved. 1 month later, Gaspar de Portola decided to search again for Monterey Bay. Father Serra joined a group aboard the San Antonio. The ship set sail for Monterey on April 16, 1770. Patola followed a day later with a second group marching by land. On June 1, 1770, after 45 days at sea, the San Antonio sailed into Monterey Bay. Patola, who had arrived a few days earlier, greeted Father Serra. 150 years after Vizcaino's explorations, Monterey was found again. This time it would be quickly colonized for Spain. Captain Patola had actually reached Monterey Bay the year before, but he had not recognized it. Junípero Serra was thrilled by the beauty of Monterey. It reminded him of his home in Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. He started a second mission by hanging bells from an oak tree and ringing them. He planted a large cross in the ground and blessed it, and set up an altar and sang several hymns. A few curious Indians came to watch. This new mission, Mission San Carlos, would be his home for the rest of his life. Father Serra lived in one small room at Mission San Carlos. Because he had taken a vow of poverty, the room was very simple. The only furniture was a narrow wooden bed, a small table, and a chair. He had one blanket for his bed, but no mattress. On his desk were his Bible, his prayer book, and a candle, a quill pen, and an ink bottle. He wrote, "While we have health, a tortilla, and herbs of the field, what more could we desire?" Father Serra tried to treat the Indians with kindness. Unfortunately, many Spanish soldiers who came with Serra did not. Many physically abused the Native American people. Father Serra wanted to win the Indians' trust so that he could teach them about God's love and mercy. Since evangelizing the Indians would be difficult if the Spaniards mistreated them, Serra decided to move the mission buildings away from the fort. That way, the Indians who lived at the mission would be separated from the abusive soldiers. When the news about Monterey Bay reached Mexico City, the cathedral bells rang all day. Spain now claimed 3 harbors in Upper California: San Diego, Monterey, and San Francisco. Spanish settlement in the Upper California was spreading northward along the Pacific coast. Father Serra traveled up and down Alta California for 14 more years. He established 7 more missions, 9 in all. The missions were placed about 30 miles apart, 1 day's ride at a time. At every mission, he told the Indians about the love of Christ. More than 6,000 Indians were converted and baptized by the time of his death. He opened schools for the children and taught them Spanish. He showed the men how to grow crops and to make brick houses from clay and straw. He brought in looms and taught the women how to weave and sew. Craftsmen taught carpentry and ironwork. Blacksmiths and tanners demonstrated their trades. If the Indians learned new skills, thought Junípero Serra, they could become productive tradespeople. After a few years, the missions produced an abundance of goods. Within Father Serra's lifetime, they became thriving and self-sufficient communities. As more settlers arrived, towns sprang up around the missions. Some of these towns grew into the modern cities of San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Near the end of his life, Father Serra traveled all the way back to Mexico City. He reported the soldiers' mistreatment of the Indians to the Spanish officials. He pleaded with these officials for the Indians' rights. Father Serra died at the age of 70 at Mission San Carlos, where he was buried beneath the church altar. His friend, Father Francisco Pelú, and others continued his mission work. By 1823, 21 missions stretched from San Diego to Sonoma, California, along a dirt road called the El Camino Real, the King's Highway. Today, several roads and highways follow Serra's old footpath. When Junípero Serra came as a missionary to the New World, he did not know what a large role he would play in the history of California. His only wish was to tell the Indians about the love of Christ, but by founding the first 9 California missions, he began the European settlement of what is now the state of California. In the capital of Washington, D.C., there is a room called Statutory Hall, where 2 most important people from each state have statues in this hall. When Californians chose the most important people from their state, one of them was Father Serra. That was quite an honor. Father Serra's statue went to Washington in 1931. In 1963, the U.S. Congress asked for a special medal to be made. This medal was to honor Serra's birthday. That was the first time such an honor was given to a Catholic priest. There were statues of Junípero Serra throughout California, in Monterey, Sacramento, Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and many other places. There are buildings, streets, highways, and parks named after him. There is even a mountaintop in California named Junípero Serra Peak. In 1987, Pope Paul II officially gave Father Junípero Serra the title of Blessed. This religious honor is the second step towards sainthood in the Catholic Church. In September 2015, Pope Francis canonized Junípero Serra, or declared him a saint, proclaiming he was the evangelizer of the West in the United States. These are amazing tributes to the humble little friar who never sought fame or honor, but only to share the love of God.